I'll not read the story of the prodigal son. It's printed in your liturgy this morning, and for those of you joining us on the internet, you'll find the story in the 15th chapter of Luke. It is one of those parables that is unique to Luke. There's nothing like it in any of the other Gospels. But still, you could stand up in almost any church in the nation and solemnly say, there was a man who had two sons. And immediately everyone starts to complete the story in their own minds. The congregation has heard it over and over. One son is obedient and disciplined, but his brother has appetites that demanded attention. We receive it in the form of a first century Jewish family narrative. So the son who wanders away in order to create the dramatic tension, that son is said to do the things that a Jewish father couldn't stand. He leaves the land, which by implication is leaving the faith. Judaism took place in a place. So he's leaving their faith. He is lazy and unproductive. He parties his money away, what the Irish called a wild rover. There's even a theme song I can teach you. He consorted with people who were not his people. He indulged, at least according to his righteous brother, in drinking and sex with Gentiles, and ended up tending to pigs, which is the worst thing that a kosher family could even think about one of their kids doing. The surprise twist in the story is that the son who has blown it so badly returns to his father's house, and where he would fully expect to have been rejected, and frankly, the first hearers of this story might have expected that the son would be taken outside the city and stoned to death in an honor killing. But rather than being subjected to execution or rejection, he was fully restored to his status as a son and welcomed back into the family and made whole. Now, the story doesn't have any surprise for us. We've heard the story so many times. We know how it's going to end. There's nothing about it that is shocking or surprising to us. And that's why we always have to strive to take these familiar stories and put them into a more contemporary setting. If you were writing that story today, what elements would you use to describe a son who has gone so far away from you that he can no longer be accepted? Now, we've heard news stories about teenage girls in Europe or in the United States. Could be some Midwestern girl that grew up in Methodist Sunday school who becomes radicalized by videos on the internet and slips away to go to Syria to become the bride of a terrorist in ISIS. Certainly the most common experience I had in the first 20 years that I was in ministry was when a son or a daughter tried to tell his or her parents that they were gay. And I've literally had grown sons brought to my church office by the parents asking me to cast out the demon of homosexuality from their beloved son. It was not until the late 1990s that I ever got to meet a married couple that openly loved their openly gay son or daughter. It was a long time coming. And the nightmare is certainly not over for hundreds of millions of people who are living in traditional Christian or Muslim or conservative Jewish families. But if you'll forgive me for being maybe a little too personal, I can actually give you an example from my family life. My brother and I had a high school friend who was arrested on a drug charge. And his arrest was unusual enough back in the 70s that it was the story of the arrest was actually published in the Glasgow Daily Times. My father read the story aloud to us in the family room, and then he folded the paper. He looked at my brother Billy and me and said, "If either of you are ever arrested with drugs, I'll come to the jail, but not to bail you out. I'll bring my pistol and I will shoot you between the bars and kill you where you sit." Now, my father was a deacon at the First Christian Church in Glasgow. My mother was the church secretary. They had attended Bible studies and Sunday school all of their lives. They knew the story of the prodigal son. But my father had no intentions of showing mercy to a son of his who might have ever use drugs. Now, my mother would have added wine and beer to that list. Thank God she didn't have a vote. I don't want you to think that my parents were monsters, although that was monstrous to say that to your own children. They also did a lot of good things. They were hardworking, honest, disciplined people. But they both represented the role of the obedient son who stayed home in the prodigal son story. They were the people who followed the rules. They worked hard. They paid their taxes. They were productive. They were religious. They did not bring shame on the family. And because they had devoted their lives to not bringing shame on the family, they would not tolerate anyone else who did either. So when I hear of mercy killings in the West Bank or in the Gaza Strip, I'm never surprised. I understand that world. I came from that world. I knew that I too could mess up badly enough that I would have been the victim of an honor killing. It's in the Quran. It's in the Hebrew Bible. Not simply as a threat or a concept. Jesus probably had seen it done. When he tells the story of the prodigal son, he is telling it as one who saw the prodigal son being stoned to death. Jesus tells the story to a peer group who have expected, maybe albeit sadly, but still fully expected, that the prodigal son would be dragged outside the city and stoned to death. And his brother might have thrown the first stone. It's not been shown here in Springfield, but one of the Oscar-winning documentaries this year was Girl in the River, which is about honor killings in Pakistan, where now between 700 and 1,000 honor killings take place every year, nearly 3/4 of which are young women, many of whom were victims of rape, that if they were raped, they have brought dishonor on the family and they are killed. In America, we don't tolerate honor killing. We don't do honor killing. It's too messy for us. It's too obscene for us. And besides, we're Americans. We can figure out how to make a profit off of this. We can figure out how to make money out of someone who messes up. Drug use is the distant land our prodigals wander into. In the 1960s, President Lyndon Johnson began a war on poverty, and it was a great idea, and it was actually having success. I don't think we talk enough about how much could be done if a nation resolved to actually go to war on poverty. But by 1971, President Nixon turned the war on poverty into a war on the poor, called the war on drugs. I have no idea whether he actually believed his own propaganda or if, decades later, Nancy Reagan actually believed that it was a matter of just say no. But tremendous resources were brought to bear in policing, international drug interdiction, and of course a massive buildup of prisons where we punish the addicted for being addicted. Just say no. Just say no. I heard one expert in the field of addiction treatment say that you could just say no to urinating for the next 48 hours. Just say no. It's your choice. You're in charge. It's up to you. Just don't go pee for 48 hours. And you thought you were uncomfortable when I told you about my father threatening to shoot me. I've got about 10 more minutes of this sermon, ladies and gentlemen, before you have any possibility of slipping out of here unnoticed. There are about 23 million people with addiction problems in the United States. 23 million. 23 million people who cannot go to sleep if there's a beer left in the refrigerator. 23 million people who will not visit your home for a dinner party without making an excuse to go into the master bathroom and looking in your medicine cabinet to see if you've got anything they might harvest. We have estimated that there are about 10,000 people in the Springfield area who are using meth. But even that scourge has lately seen itself being edged out of the market by a resurgence of heroin use. Americans have an incredible appetite for drugs. Americans make up 5% of the global population, but we consume 40% of the world's drugs. And that after 45 years of a multi-billion-dollar war on drugs. Still, we are consuming the world's lion's share of illegal drugs. Over the years, the hunger for more strict punishments continues to raise the bar. You can be charged with a felony for possessing 1 tablet of Adderall or Xanax that you don't have a prescription for. 1 tablet in your possession, and you get a felony charge. If you use cocaine and sniff it off of a small mirror, the dust residue left on the mirror in your possession will get you a felony charge. Just that much. 2 million Americans, either in jail or on parole, most of whom were caught somewhere in the web of drug use, distribution, or manufacture. This is our honor killing. This is our honor killing. Addiction is a problem, but we've insisted on making it a crime. We insist upon treating addicts as criminals, and then by putting them into our prison system, lo and behold, it's self-fulfilling prophecy, we turn them into criminals who, when they finally have served their time and get out, cannot get a job, they can't get an education, they can't get a Pell Grant, they can't get into public housing. We don't even let them vote. They are cast off and sent into the distant country where they do menial jobs for the rest of their miserable lives. Unless they come from a rich family, there's a different set of rules for rich families. I'm not going to chase that bunny into the woods today, but trust me, I'll get back to it. In Michael Moore's most recent documentary, Where to Invade Next, Moore stages a tongue-in-cheek one-man invasion of several Western European democracies in order to steal their ideas. He plants the flag in various countries and takes their ideas, many of which actually originated in the USA. I believe this was Moore's best film yet, and if I am allowed to make film recommendations to the world, stop what you're doing and go see this documentary. In one section, though, he invades Portugal, where the government used to conduct a war on drugs, very similar to our own. However, once they realized after a generation, and governments don't learn fast, but after 20 years of arresting, punishing, putting into prison their drug users, they made a decision to reverse their tactics. In Portugal, it was not simply a matter of legalizing or decriminalizing drugs, the way certain parts of the United States are now trying out. If you legalize drugs and that's all you do, sure, you're going to get big tax revenue, but you will also get an increase in crime, a decrease in productivity, and a lot more addiction, even in the case of just marijuana. And I'm in favor of the decriminalization of marijuana. I wish that the circumstances that are currently present in Colorado could be spread around the country. But if you do that only, if all you do is make it legal, you will definitely increase the problems related to drug use. Because in Portugal, simultaneously, they decriminalized it, but put money into treatment programs. They took the more loving and kind and realistic approach, acknowledging that addiction is a problem that calls for, in the United States, when we start to legalize marijuana, we're just shrugging our shoulders. Whatever you do to yourself is whatever you do to yourself. But in Portugal, they legalized it and backed it up with treatment programs so that now when the police find a heroin user in their streets, they take them to a treatment program. They understand addiction as a problem that can be solved, not a sin that calls for punishment. But it hasn't turned Portugal into a drug-free world. It has, however, reduced drug use by about 50%. It took 20 years to do it. There's no quick fixes here. But the drug use rate in Portugal has fallen dramatically. But even their drug czar, who Michael Moore interviewed in this film, acknowledges that drug use is a part of life. Folks, I've probably had 6 cups of coffee today. I'll likely have more caffeine before the day is over. I will spend part of the day on the internet, which is another form of addiction in and of itself. We use alcohol, we use tobacco, we use television. We are creatures who have tendencies towards addiction. The issue is to curb it enough so that it is not a problem. But we're all users. We are all users of some addictive behaviors. Now, I'll confess that I did my master's thesis in the treatment of alcoholism. I worked as a counselor in the VA treatment program, but I don't really like working with addicts. And I'll tell you why. The failure rate is too high. About half of addicts who go into treatment will begin abusing drugs again in less than a year. And I think in more honest estimations of putting someone through treatment and them successfully spending the rest of their lives without using the substance that created their problems, about 7%. Still, I trace the birth of my own substantive spiritual life to the recovery movement. I became interested in AA when I offered to take a church member to meetings, that I would go if he would go. And that was Jim. And he decided after 2 weeks that all those old drunks in the AA meeting in the basement of the Methodist church were just a bunch of hypocrites, so he quit going. Jim returned to drinking, and a few months later was found dead in his mobile home, having literally starved himself to death in isolation and intoxication. But I kept going to the meetings because what I saw there was what I thought church could be. People who were being honest about their own problems, who were reaching out to one another to find strength, support, encouragement, guidance, so that they didn't end up like Jim. What I love about AA is that it's life or death spirituality. I'm either going to get it together or I'm going to die. And I think a lot of us need to try to view our spirituality as not simply life enhancement, not something that puts a little icing on the cupcake, but a matter of life or death. Now, after all these years, I can't tell you that I'm really a huge fan of the content of the 12-step program of AA or Al-Anon. I'm not sure they wouldn't have a similar success rate if they just got together and read the phone book to each other. But that's just my opinion. But I believe that the healing comes from the relationships. That's what I think. I think the healing comes from the friendships, the community, the connection to other people who, like them, are broken and they're willing to admit it. Our emphasis on community is not an accident. It is a core spiritual value. Jung suggested that part of the reason why we call alcoholic beverages spirits is because addiction is at some level a spiritual thirst, a hunger, a need. Not a need for religion. Goodness knows religion, especially with its board meetings, give you reasons to drink. But a spiritual need, a need to be connected, supported, cared for, loved, sometimes protected, and sometimes challenged, and sometimes becoming aware that somebody needs you too. We don't just go to community because I need to be fixed, but because I also need to be needed. I need to be a part of your life's journey. That's community, and that, I believe, is where all substantive healing happens.
You have been watching a progressive Christian video from the Community Christian Church of Springfield, Missouri. We encourage our viewers to donate to our efforts in feeding the homeless and hungry of our community. Write to us at Reverend Dr. Ray at AOL.com for more information.